My name is Maya Whitfield, and the night my house caught fire is etched into my mind with a clarity that almost hurts to recall. I wasn't a child anymore. I had just enough experience to know how life should work, and just enough hope to believe that family shows up when the world falls apart. That hope, I would soon learn, was fragile. Fire doesn't announce itself like it does in movies. There's no dramatic countdown, no perfect moment to act heroically. For me, it began with smell, a sharp, unnatural scent that pricked at my nose and made my stomach twist. Something burning, something chemical, with a hint of old wood, like the air itself had decided to betray me. I froze for a second, folding laundry in my bedroom, trying to convince myself it was nothing. Then came the sound, a crack so sudden it made me flinch, followed by a low roar that grew faster than my mind could process. Smoke spilled into the hallway, thick and curling like a living creature, and the heat hit my face before I even thought to step back. My partner, Daniel, had already scooped our daughter into his arms. She clutched his shirt, half asleep and completely bewildered, and he didn't panic. He just moved, swift, deliberate, calm, a man who knew instinct was louder than fear. I checked the rooms anyway. I always check. Habit, denial, or maybe the naive belief that if I looked hard enough, I could somehow stop the impossible. The guest room was already hazy, the office door hot under my fingers. I thought about everything I couldn't take. Photos stacked on the shelves, the box of letters I never opened, drawings from our daughter taped to the fridge. A lifetime of small memories, now untouchable. I grabbed my phone. My wallet. That was all. Barefoot, we stepped outside into the night air, which hit like punishment after the heat and smoke inside. Behind us, the house burned as though it had always been made of paper. Orange tongues of fire clawed up the walls, consuming years of work, memories, and ordinary life. Glass shattered somewhere inside, a sound sharper than I thought possible, echoing down the street. Neighbors shouted. Sirens wailed in the distance, approaching, but impossibly slow in my panic-addled mind. A Red Cross volunteer wrapped a rough blanket around my shoulders. I didn't feel cold. I didn't feel safe. I felt hollow, stripped down to nothing but awareness and the weight of disbelief. Our daughter tugged at Daniel's sleeve. "Where's my room?" she asked. His response was simple. He held her tight, forehead pressed against hers. No lies, no false reassurances, just protection in its purest form. And that's when I reached for my phone. Not to take photos, not to call insurance, not to post for strangers to see. I opened the family group chat. The same one we had used for years for birthdays, holidays, awkward memes no one responded to. My parents, my older sister, my younger brother, everyone who shared my last name, everyone who knew my address. My fingers hovered for a heartbeat. Then I typed the words that mattered most. "We're safe, but everything is gone." I hit send. The little read receipts appeared faster than I had expected. One by one, silent confirmations that my message had reached them. I waited. I expected someone to call. My mother, always first to react. My sister, eager to insert herself even when she didn't know the details. My brother, who liked to fix everything whether it was fixable or not. Nothing. No typing bubbles. No calls. No emojis. Just the quiet glow of my screen reflecting back at me, empty. My chest tightened, and the first real pang of loss didn't come from the fire. It came from the absence of concern, the silence that said everything without a single word. Firefighters arrived soon after, moving with the precision of people trained to face chaos daily. Radios crackled. Water hissed against the flames, relentless and indifferent. Someone asked me a question. I nodded without registering what it was. The world outside my house's walls moved like a machine, efficient, practiced, and uncaring. We were taken to a temporary shelter set up in a nearby community center. Folding cots lined the gym. Bottled water, donated clothing, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. The place smelled of disinfectant and rubber mats, and I realized I had never felt more exposed. Our daughter fell asleep against Daniel's chest almost instantly, her small body accepting the new reality faster than my mind could. I checked my phone again. Still nothing. I made excuses for them. They're driving. They don't know yet. They're asleep. They'll call later. But somewhere, deep and quiet, a thought began to form, one I wasn't ready to admit. They had read my message. They knew, and they chose not to answer. Standing there, barefoot, Amidst the hum of the shelter lights, I realized something. Losing your home is devastating, yes, but losing the people you thought would show up when it mattered most is a different kind of pain entirely. The first few minutes after sending that message were unbearable. My thumb hovered over my phone as if simply holding it would force someone to respond. My parents, my sister, my brother, people who had known me all my life, had received the words I typed in a calm, clear voice. We're safe, but everything is gone. And yet, silence. The kind of silence that feels deliberate, like the world itself has chosen to ignore you. I told myself they were busy. They were driving. They hadn't checked their phones. Surely, someone would call soon. But every passing minute made the pit in my stomach grow heavier. My daughter stirred in Daniel's arms, murmuring in her sleep, oblivious to the chaos behind us. I envied her. Children adapt, survive, and forget faster than adults. I envied the simplicity of her trust in him, in us, in the world that I now felt had betrayed me. The shelter felt unreal. Folding cots lined the walls like rows of temporary graves. The fluorescent lights hummed incessantly, casting everything in harsh white. The smell of disinfectant and sweat clung to my clothes, mingling with the lingering scent of smoke in my hair. Strangers moved around us with quiet efficiency, offering water, blankets, snacks, a kind word. People who didn't have to care, yet somehow did. It was humbling. And then, still, nothing from my family. Not a single call, no text, no reaction. I stared at my phone until my eyes ached. Each red receipt glowed like a small betrayal. They had seen. They had chosen to remain silent. My mind raced with reasons, each more disappointing than the last. They're scared, I told myself. They don't know how to respond. Maybe they're frozen. But even these excuses felt shallow. It wasn't until I opened Instagram almost absent-mindedly that the truth landed with the force of a hammer. My feed opened to a carousel of photos. My parents, my sister, and my brother, laughing around a lake, drinks in hand, smiling in matching shirts. A weekend getaway. Tagged everyone. Caption: best family weekend ever. I stared at it, unable to move. My chest tightened, my stomach knotted. They had read my message. They knew our house had burned, and yet they laughed. They posed for cameras while my life was reduced to ashes behind me. I felt dizzy. Daniel noticed my stiff posture and the blank stare that seemed to pierce the screen. He didn't ask. He simply wrapped a hand around my shoulder and held it there. Solid. Safe. I wanted to call them. I wanted to scream. I wanted to demand an explanation. But the words caught in my throat. Instead, I scrolled slowly through the photos again, searching for something I knew I wouldn't find. Concern. Empathy, acknowledgement. Nothing. Just the images of a world that didn't include the pain we were living through. The volunteers at the shelter were kind, persistent in their helpfulness. One man brought a hot meal, insisting I eat while it was fresh. Another offered a blanket, then sat for a moment and told me stories of losing his own home in a fire years ago. Their empathy was quiet but real, given freely without expectation or judgment. And in contrast, my family's silence roared louder than any blaze could. I spent the night trying to sleep in the cot beside our daughter, listening to her soft breathing against Daniel's chest. Every minute felt like a lifetime. I imagined my parents scrolling past my message, knowing everything, and deciding that their lives, their weekend, were more important than acknowledging mine. Each imagined thought added weight to my chest, pressing down until I could barely breathe. By morning, I had accepted the unpleasant truth. They weren't coming. They didn't care. And in that realization, anger began to rise, slow and deliberate, simmering beneath the shock. The fire had taken our home, yes, but the silence had taken something far more insidious: trust, love, and the expectation that family would show up when it mattered. And yet, life moved forward. Volunteers handed out coffee and breakfast. Our daughter woke with a groggy, cheerful smile, asking for cereal and her favorite blanket. Daniel moved quietly, keeping our little family tethered together while the rest of the world felt distant, unfeeling, and unreal. I sat on the edge of the cot, staring at my phone one more time, watching the same red receipts blink silently back at me. The lesson was clear, though I wasn't ready to embrace it fully. Family is not defined by blood or shared memories. Family is defined by who shows up when the world burns. And mine, the people who had known me the longest, had made their choice. That day, as we sorted through donated clothes and shared meager meals with other fire survivors, I realized I would have to accept the void my family left. I couldn't fix it. I couldn't call it back. The silence was theirs, not mine. And for the first time, I felt a small, strange relief. I no longer had to wait for someone who had decided not to come. By the afternoon, I was tired in a way deeper than physical exhaustion. My daughter napped in Daniel's arms. I stared at the folding chairs and the hum of fluorescent lights, trying to process the quiet betrayal of people who had been a constant in my life. Outside, the smoke from our home still rose in the distance, a reminder of everything lost. Inside, the echoing silence of my family was heavier than any flame. And as I watched strangers care for us without expectation, I began to understand something crucial. Love given freely without condition is far more reliable than the love tied to tradition, obligation, or convenience. My family had shown me what I had always suspected, and the revelation, as painful as it was, marked the first step toward reclaiming my own sense of worth. By the second morning, I had already stopped checking my phone constantly, but not completely. There was a quiet hope lingering somewhere, irrational, stubborn, that maybe someone in my family would finally realize that our lives had been turned upside down. That hope died almost instantly when I opened Instagram. A friend had tagged me in a post. I hesitated, thumb hovering over the notification, and then tapped. My feed filled with images I hadn't expected. A carousel of smiling faces, my parents and sister holding drinks, my brother laughing with a group at a restaurant. Caption: Weekend getaway with the fam, best laughs all year. Tagged everyone except me. I froze. My stomach knotted, and for a moment I felt like I might fall into the floor. I had sent one simple, honest message: we're safe, but everything is gone. One. And they had seen it. They had chosen to scroll past it while continuing their happy lives. Their joy displayed like a dagger in slow motion, slicing into the fragile calm I had tried to maintain. Daniel noticed my expression and said nothing. He simply guided my hand to his, anchoring me in the present. Our daughter tugged at his sleeve, asking if she could watch the volunteers set up the activity table. I blinked back tears, unable to answer without my voice shaking. Strangers noticed before my family did. Strangers, who had never even met us, offered warmth, meals, blankets, and reassurance. My family, the people who had shaped my world, had opted out. Hours later, I stepped outside the shelter for a moment of air. The smoke from what remained of our home rose lazily into the morning sky, curling like ghostly fingers. And there, while standing barefoot on the cracked pavement, I realized the full scale of it. My family had turned the most devastating moment of my life into a backdrop for their own comfort and amusement. That afternoon, I found another post, my brother this time. He hadn't tagged me, but it didn't matter. He posted a photo of himself at a bar with friends, a glass of beer raised to the camera with the caption, "Family isn't about blood, it's about loyalty. Some people just don't get it." My name was implied. Everyone knew. And in the corner of the image, someone had scribbled #responsibility in the caption. I felt my chest tighten. Rage bubbled beneath the surface, a hot, slow pressure that refused to dissipate. My mind spun through memories of years spent covering gaps for them, paying bills, co-signing leases, helping out financially, emotionally, whenever it was needed. Always silently, always assumed. And now, in the aftermath of a disaster that had destroyed our home, they were turning the narrative back onto me, blaming me, implying that I was the one who lacked loyalty. I wanted to shout. I wanted to block them, call them, demand answers, or post something that would shame them publicly. But instead, I closed the phone slowly, setting it on the picnic table outside the shelter. The cool wind brushed against my face, cutting through my anger just enough to prevent hysteria. Daniel placed a gentle hand on my back and nodded toward our daughter, who was now running barefoot across the gym floor with other children. The contrast was striking. Strangers, volunteers, people who didn't know us at all, were acting with kindness and intention. My family, the people I had trusted the most, had gone public to manipulate perception, to turn what should have been concern into subtle condemnation. It was cruel, deliberate, and calculated, and for the first time, I recognized it clearly. By evening, the shelter was quieter. The hum of fluorescent lights and the soft whispers of exhausted families created a strange cocoon of forced calm. I sat on a cot, holding our daughter as she dozed in my arms, feeling the weight of betrayal settle into my bones. I replayed every moment since the fire, the smells, the crackling flames, Daniel's steady hands, the Red Cross blankets, the people who had shown up without hesitation. And then I thought of my family, absent, indifferent, turning tragedy into theater for themselves. I realized then that silence had power. The silence of those I expected to care was louder than any fire alarm, louder than any roar of burning timber. They had read my words, and their decision to not respond communicated something clearer than any apology could have. When it mattered most, they would not be there. And I could no longer pretend otherwise. That night, while our daughter slept, I sat by the small folding table, running my fingers over the edges of my phone, staring at the screen. I thought about everything I had given over the years, and all the times I had believed loyalty meant submission. The social betrayal of my family, the public display, the turning of my disaster into their story, was like salt on an open wound. It wasn't just disappointment, it was clarity. The fire had taken our home, yes, but the social betrayal, the calculated indifference, had burned away my old assumptions about what family was. They had chosen their comfort over our safety, their narrative over truth, their image over empathy. And in that painful realization, a new thought began to grow, faint but unrelenting. Maybe I didn't need them anymore. Maybe loyalty wasn't inherited. Maybe it had to be earned. Maybe the people who really mattered were the ones who showed up, without condition, without expectation, without hesitation. The night ended with me staring at the ceiling, exhausted, angry, but quietly resolved. I would survive this fire. I would protect my daughter. And I would no longer wait for people who had already chosen not to come. The story of my life was mine to write, and it was time I started with a clean page. The shelter had a rhythm, whether I liked it or not. Folding cots lined the gym in neat rows. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, and the smell of disinfectant mingled with the lingering smoke clinging to my hair. At first, every small noise, the rustle of blankets, the clink of metal trays, the low murmur of volunteers, felt jarring. But slowly, the space became a sort of makeshift home, the only one we had left. Daniel and I fell into routines without speaking much about it. He would make sure our daughter had breakfast, a small packet of granola or cereal, always sharing the warm bits with her first. I would organize donated clothes, folding them neatly into piles that made sense only to me. It was mindless work, but there was comfort in the control. Amid chaos, there was at least order in my hands. And everywhere I looked, strangers were stepping in where family had stepped out. Volunteers brought food without judgment, offered blankets without conditions, and listened without interruption. One woman noticed me standing awkwardly in the corner and pressed a small thermos of coffee into my hands. "You need this more than I do," she said simply. No lectures, no assumptions, no questions about why my family hadn't called. I couldn't stop thinking about it. The contrast was glaring. Strangers, people who didn't know me, acted with care. My family, the people who had known me my whole life, had opted for indifference. I tried not to let it hurt as I sorted through the small comforts brought by these compassionate strangers, but the sting was persistent, lingering at the edges of every motion. By the second day, our daughter had adjusted better than I had. Children adapt faster because they have no choice. She lined up her shoes next to the cot, brushed her teeth in the plastic sink, and accepted her temporary bed without complaint. I watched her, marveling at the ease with which she fit into this makeshift world. And I realized something crucial. If she could adjust and survive without complaint, so could I. That afternoon, Daniel went out to fetch something for lunch, leaving me with our daughter and a few strangers who had quickly become allies. I sat on the floor, sorting through a pile of donated toys, feeling the weight of the world pressing against my chest. The quiet hum of the shelter felt like a heartbeat, steady and reassuring. For the first time since the fire, I allowed myself to breathe without fear of judgment. I thought about our home, the ashes, the remnants of a life built painstakingly over years. There was grief, yes, a sharp, unrelenting ache, but there was also clarity. The fire had taken walls, floors, and possessions, but it had exposed a deeper truth. My family's love had always been conditional. Their absence, their silence, their public performances had made it unmistakably clear. I didn't need their validation, their approval, or their attention. And so, in that gymnasium, surrounded by strangers who acted with genuine care, I began to feel a quiet sense of empowerment. Each small act of independence, folding clothes, preparing a small meal, helping our daughter adjust, was a tiny reclamation of control. I realized that survival wasn't just about keeping our bodies alive, it was about reclaiming our dignity and sense of agency. Daniel returned with a few sandwiches and a smile. Our daughter ran into his arms, and I watched the scene unfold, pure, unself-conscious love that hadn't been diminished by fire, loss, or neglect. It struck me how resilience often grew in spaces of quiet care, not in grand gestures or dramatic declarations. Strangers had shown us how to exist in the aftermath of disaster without expectation. They had shown us how to be human again. By evening, the shelter settled into its nightly rhythm. Volunteers dimmed the lights slightly, cots creaked as people shifted into sleep, and the low murmur of conversation softened. I sat on a folding chair, our daughter asleep on the cot beside me, Daniel resting nearby. The stillness felt different from the silence of my family. This silence was filled with intent, with respect, with an unspoken acknowledgement that we were here and needed to heal. I thought about the message I had sent days ago. We're safe, but everything is gone. The simplicity of it contrasted sharply with the complexity of our lives now. And yet, for the first time, I felt a subtle shift. I didn't need to wait for apologies, explanations, or recognition. I didn't need my family to act. The fire had taken our home, yes, but the absence of family had opened space for something else. Choice. Choice to build a new normal, to define love and loyalty on my own terms. Choice to protect my daughter from the same expectations that had bound me for so long. Choice to step out of a cycle of obligation and into a life guided by care, respect, and intention. That night, as I lay on the cot, listening to the soft rhythm of our daughter's breathing and Daniel's even presence beside me, I felt a tiny spark of hope. Not for my family, not for a return to the life we lost, but for the life we would create from the ashes. It wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't be immediate, but it would be ours. The fire had been devastating. The betrayal had been cruel. But the quiet kindness of strangers, the steadfast love of Daniel, and the adaptability of our daughter were teaching me a lesson more powerful than any possession or inherited loyalty. Survival isn't just about endurance. It's about recognizing where care is real, where effort is genuine, and where love is unconditional. And in that gym, under fluorescent lights, and amid the hum of whispered conversations, I realized we had begun to survive, not just physically, but fully, intentionally, and on our own terms. The first step toward reclaiming my life began quietly, deliberately, without fanfare. While Daniel and our daughter slept in our small corner of the shelter, I opened my laptop, my hand steady despite the weeks of upheaval. I wasn't angry anymore, not in a frantic, uncontrollable way. I was calm, calculated, and resolute. Every page I opened, every account I reviewed, was an act of quiet rebellion. I started with a shared savings account my parents had set up years ago. They'd always framed it as a safety net, something for family emergencies. But in reality, it had always been a lever to pull, a way to ensure I was available whenever they needed money or favors. I logged in and froze at the balance, remembering the countless times it had been tapped without discussion, without gratitude, without acknowledgement of the strain it caused me. Then I closed it, not impulsively, not with rage, but with the calm deliberation of someone reclaiming ownership of their own life. Every click, every confirmation felt heavier than money I had earned myself. Heavier because it wasn't just dollars I was recovering, it was years of expectation, quiet guilt, and unbalanced obligation. Next came the credit cards, cosign leases, and other financial obligations tied to my name. Each one felt like a door I had been leaving open for them to walk through at will. Each closure was a declaration. I am done being the invisible safety net. I am done being the one who sacrifices quietly while they continue unaffected. I didn't announce it. I didn't post about it. I simply executed it with precision, step by step. The phone buzzed almost immediately. First, it was my sister. The tone of the message was frantic. "Maya, what did you do? I can't access the account. This must be a mistake." I didn't respond. I knew exactly what she was feeling, the first flicker of panic that comes when the invisible support system suddenly vanishes. Then my brother tried through a different channel. "You're really going to do this over nothing? Over a misunderstanding?" Misunderstanding. As if years of quiet labor, of filling gaps, of absorbing their chaos, could be reduced to a single miscommunication. I left the message unread. Finally, my mother. A long, scrolling text filled with guilt, accusations, and veiled manipulations. She wrote about family loyalty, tradition, and the dangers of letting outsiders influence decisions. She implied Daniel was controlling me. Her words were familiar in their rhythm, like a script I had memorized in painful detail over the years. But this time, I wasn't reading them as the obedient daughter. I read them as someone fully aware of the pattern and fully unwilling to participate. Then came my father. His voicemail was short, clipped, and deliberate. "You're cutting off your own blood, Maya. You'll regret this." I listened to it twice, then saved it, not out of spite but as evidence that even now they still framed me as the problem. No acknowledgement of the fire, no concern for our well-being, just a warning about consequences. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The actions themselves, closing accounts, removing my name from obligations, taking control, were enough. Every missed call, every panicked message, every accusatory voicemail reinforced what I had already known. They had always valued me for what I could provide, never for who I was. Daniel didn't ask questions. He simply observed, hand resting lightly on my back, his presence a steady counterpoint to the storm of messages. Our daughter slept between us, oblivious to the power struggle unfolding through texts and calls. I felt a small, satisfying calm settle in my chest, the first tangible sign that I was reclaiming more than money. I was reclaiming my life, my autonomy, my sense of self. A week passed, and the intensity of their messages didn't fade, it mutated. My sister sent another, more cutting. "You'll regret this when you need us." My brother posted cryptic stories online, thinly veiled critiques of loyalty, family, and responsibility. I scrolled past. I focused on the work I could control, the small repairs, organizing what we could salvage, planning our next steps. By the second week, my mother's tone changed. One evening, her text read differently, softer, almost pleading. "I hope someday you'll understand why we did what we did." But I didn't respond. Understanding didn't require me to give access. Forgiveness didn't mean I had to reopen doors that had been deliberately closed on my well-being. The act of stepping back gave me perspective. I realized that throughout my life, I had measured love by sacrifice. I had equated compliance with affection. But now, standing amid the wreckage of my home and the emotional void left by my family, I saw it clearly. Love without respect is nothing but expectation dressed as duty. I started planning our next steps. Small, deliberate choices, finding a temporary apartment, budgeting carefully, reestablishing independence. Every decision was a reminder that survival wasn't just about enduring flames. It was about rebuilding boundaries, reclaiming agency, and choosing who would remain in our lives. By the end of the week, the messages slowed. Not because they stopped caring, but because they realized the rules had changed. The narrative was no longer theirs to control. And for the first time in years, I felt the thrill of quiet victory. Not vengeance, not anger, but the solid knowledge that I was finally steering my own life. That night, as I sat on a makeshift chair in the dim shelter, our daughter asleep between us, Daniel quietly handed me a cup of coffee. "You're doing the right thing," he said softly. I nodded, letting the warmth seep into me. I didn't need their validation. I didn't need their approval. I had reclaimed something far more valuable, myself. Weeks passed. The shelter became less of a temporary stop and more of a transitional space, a buffer between the devastation and the life we were slowly reconstructing. I had stopped expecting my family to reach out with concern or empathy. Their silence had taught me a lesson I had been blind to for years. Love that asks for constant sacrifice isn't love, it's control. Then one afternoon, while I was sorting through a small pile of salvaged items from our home, Daniel nudged me gently. "Your father called," he said, his voice careful. I paused, unsure whether to feel anxious, angry, or indifferent. My finger hovered over the green answer button. I took a breath and pressed it, ready to hear him out but not to surrender. His voice was low and steady. Maya, he began, I was wrong. About everything. About how I treated you. About what I expected. There was a long pause, filled only with the faint hum of traffic from outside. I didn't understand what it meant to rely on you, or to fail you. The fire, it made me realize how much I've taken for granted. I listened without interruption, letting the words settle. Understanding had arrived late, but it had arrived nonetheless. And yet, I knew something crucial. Acknowledgement did not erase years of imbalance. I didn't need to argue, defend, or even forgive in that moment. I simply needed to hear it, to recognize the truth for myself. I see you, he said finally, quieter now, almost a whisper. You've carried more than anyone should. And I'm sorry. I let the silence stretch between us. Then I spoke, carefully, deliberately. You lost me long before the fire. You lost me when you read my message and decided it wasn't worth responding. You taught me that love is conditional, measured by what I provide rather than who I am. That's the lesson I needed to survive. And now, it's time for me to live it. There was nothing more to say. No drama, no expectation, no manipulation. Just the recognition that I had stepped into a new life, one where love and respect were mutual, not transactional. After the call ended, I sat for a long time, staring at the small pile of belongings I had managed to salvage. Each item was a memory, a fragment of the life that had been, but it wasn't a chain. It was a starting point. I looked at Daniel, who was quietly folding a blanket. Our daughter nestled against him, and I felt a warmth deeper than comfort. It was certainty. We were building something that was ours, untainted by the demands and indifference of others. The next days were filled with small, intentional acts, finding a modest apartment that we could call home, unpacking boxes slowly, marking spaces with personal touches that made it ours. I taught our daughter that home isn't a building. It's the presence of people who show up, who stay when the smoke clears, and who act with care without expecting repayment. I began working again, taking jobs that were physically demanding but emotionally honest. There was a satisfaction in every repair, every hour spent fixing, cleaning, or creating something tangible. Money earned was no longer a buffer for someone else's convenience. It was proof of my agency, of the life we were rebuilding with our own hands. And through it all, the lessons of the fire remained vivid. The smoke, the heat, the crackle of flames, it was more than destruction. It was revelation. It revealed who truly mattered, who acted when action was needed, and who only performed loyalty when it was convenient. The fire burned away the illusions, leaving only truth. Daniel's presence, steady and unwavering, became a mirror for the kind of support I would allow in my life. Quiet, consistent, unconditional. Our daughter, resilient and curious, reminded me daily that life adapts, that hope survives, and that love can exist without sacrifice disguised as expectation. My family sent messages occasionally, a brief text from my mother, a muted story from my brother, a hesitant voicemail from my father. I read them, noted them, but did not respond immediately. I realized that reconciliation is not an obligation. It is a choice, one I could make only if it aligned with respect, boundaries, and truth. Months later, as we settled into our new apartment, I reflected on the past weeks and years. The fire had taken material possessions, but it had also illuminated what I truly needed: autonomy, agency, and the courage to stand firm. I realized that the most important home isn't bricks and mortar. It's the space you carve out for yourself and those you love who truly belong. One evening, I watched our daughter draw on the small kitchen table, crayons scattered around her. She drew our apartment, our little life, and I noticed the little wings she had given to her room, like the dream she had shared the night the fire first happened. She had learned to dream beyond walls, beyond limitations, beyond neglect. And I knew, with quiet certainty, that the life I was building would give her the space to grow without compromise, without conditional love, without expectation. I finally understood that the fire didn't just destroy. It freed me, freed us, freed me from obligation, from manipulation, from misplaced loyalty. It taught me that strength is quiet, resilience is deliberate, and independence is a gift you give yourself when no one else will. And as I sipped coffee with Daniel beside me, our daughter humming softly in the corner, I realized something profound. The fire had ended, but our life, real, unshakable, honest, had only just begun.